The first message arrived subtly in the late fall of 2023, seemingly out of the blue. A text, purportedly from an old ex-boyfriend Kristil Krug hadn't seen in years, asking if she wanted to hook up while he was in town. Kristil didn't respond. Why would she? Her life was vibrant, centered around her family and a successful, fulfilling career. Kristil was a biochemical engineer, a professional with an exceptional intellect, deeply involved in the world of technology and innovation. But beyond her professional life, she nurtured a lifelong passion for the performing arts, particularly modern dance. She was a mother of 3 children who were, by all accounts, the absolute light of her life. This random, inappropriate text from a distant past was easily dismissed as bizarre and unwelcome. Trigger warning: please be advised that the following case involves domestic violence, stalking, and murder, and some details may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Other messages followed, and they were anything but subtle. These weren't just awkward attempts at reconnection from an ex. They were a relentless, escalating barrage of communication, angry, obscene, and deeply unsettling. The sender hurled insults directed at her husband, Daniel Krug, disparagingly calling him a loser husband. More terrifyingly, the messages contained chilling details that indicated Kristil was under constant surveillance. It became clear this was not just a crude message. It was the beginning of a targeted campaign of harassment. Imagine the emotional toll this would take. The initial confusion giving way to a persistent, gnawing sense of unease, which then curdled into palpable fear. Who was sending these messages? Kristil initially believed it was the ex-boyfriend she had dated briefly around 2000. While he had reportedly contacted her a few times over the years since, with occasional rude or inappropriate comments, nothing compared to the sustained, threatening nature of this new barrage. She had never reported those previous, fleeting instances because the communication had stopped when she didn't engage. This felt different, more intense, more menacing. It invaded her sense of safety and peace. Just a few weeks, a terrifyingly short period after that initial text shattered her peace and introduced an element of dread into her daily life. Kristil Krug was found fatally stabbed and beaten in her suburban Denver home in Broomfield, Colorado. Her life, so full of promise and accomplishment, was brutally extinguished. How did a successful, vibrant woman, dedicated to her family, her career, and her passions, a woman actively trying to understand and combat her tormentor, end up the victim of such brutal violence within the supposed safety of her own home? And who was truly behind the terrifying and elaborate stalking campaign that immediately preceded her death? The truth, as investigators would uncover, was more shocking and far closer to home than anyone initially imagined. Kristil didn't passively accept the terror. She took proactive steps to protect herself and her family. As the messages escalated in frequency and menace, her fear grew into severe anxiety. She reached out to law enforcement, formally reporting the harassment to the Broomfield police in October 2023. Seeking to enhance their home security, she and her husband installed surveillance cameras around their property. Recognizing the potential physical threat posed by the messages, Kristil, wanting to feel empowered and capable of defending herself, even started carrying a concealed weapon and enrolled in firearm safety classes. She shared her fears and the details of the disturbing messages with her family, and the pervasive presence of this unseen stalker cast a long, dark shadow over their lives, causing worry and distress for everyone. The messages continued their relentless arrival, each one skillfully crafted to ratchet up the terror and psychological pressure. Some messages chillingly implied constant physical surveillance, suggesting the sender was nearby, watching her movements. One message delivered a specific, alarming detail. It correctly stated that her license plate tags were expired, an ordinary piece of information that in this context served as undeniable proof that she was being watched closely in her daily life. Another message implied the sender had followed her to a dentist appointment in November, demonstrating a disturbing level of knowledge about her personal schedule. The communication wasn't solely directed at Kristil. Some messages strategically included threats towards her husband, Daniel Krug. One particularly unsettling email, sent after she filed the initial police report and began actively engaging with law enforcement, even included a photo of Daniel exiting his car at his workplace. This image was accompanied by text threatening him and containing chilling, possessive statements directed at Kristil, such as, "You belong with me, I'll get rid of him, and then we can be together. They let me park and walk right into his workplace, give me the signal, and he won't come home." This specific message was so alarming to law enforcement that Glendale police were dispatched to Daniel's workplace to ensure his immediate safety, while Broomfield detectives conducted another welfare check on Kristil at their home. At that moment, both appeared unharmed, adding another layer of confusion to the already complex situation. Kristil was, as her life and career demonstrated, a smart, analytical, and resilient woman. As she collected these increasingly disturbing messages, tracking them, reporting them to the police, and implementing security measures, she was undoubtedly trying to make sense of the situation. She was analyzing the inconsistencies, looking for patterns, searching for any clue that could help identify her tormentor and explain this bizarre and terrifying harassment. Senior Deputy District Attorney Kate Armstrong would later articulate this during the trial, stating that Kristil was putting the pieces together and he was running out of time. What pieces was Kristil starting to connect that would put her in such immediate peril? Was she beginning to see inconsistencies in the stalker's information or methods that didn't align with a distant ex-boyfriend? Was she, in her process of analyzing the situation, beginning to suspect that the truth was far closer to home, residing with the man she married, the father of her children, the person who was supposed to be her partner and protector? The dawning realization of such a betrayal would be a terrifying burden to carry. The morning of December 14th, 2023, began outwardly, like many others for the Krug family. Kristil went through the familiar routine of getting 2 of her 3 children ready for school and driving them there, a typical, routine part of a parent's day. She returned home to her house in Broomfield shortly before 8 a.m., pulling her car into the attached garage. She walked into the garage, perhaps thinking about the tasks awaiting her, preparing for her workday, or simply transitioning back into the quiet of her home after the school rush. She had just entered the garage, this seemingly safe, familiar space within her own home. What happened next was swift, brutal, and utterly heartbreaking. Her husband, Daniel Krug, was waiting. He had positioned himself in the garage, lying in wait for her return. He ambushed her from behind, a sudden, violent attack in a place she should have felt secure. He attacked her violently, striking her head multiple times with a blunt object. Then, in a final horrific act, he fatally stabbed her in the heart. The details of this case are incredibly disturbing, revealing a calculated plan of terror and violence. What are your initial thoughts on the chilling level of deception displayed here? Share your opinions in the comments below. If you're finding this deep dive into the Kristil Krug case compelling and want to support in-depth true crime analysis, please take a moment to hit the like button. It really helps the channel reach more viewers. And don't forget to subscribe to MURK Files so you don't miss our future investigations into captivating cases. In the critical moments immediately following the horrific attack, Daniel Krug did not call for emergency services or attempt to render aid to his wife. Instead, his actions, meticulously detailed by prosecutors during the trial, were calculated attempts to conceal his crime and mislead any potential investigation. He took Kristil's phone and actively manipulated it, sending text messages designed to create a false narrative. He sent 2 messages, one to Kristil's brother and another directly to a Broomfield detective who had been involved in the stalking investigation, implying that Kristil had been unfaithful, a baseless claim that was later definitively disproven by investigators. These messages appear to have been an attempt to smear Kristil's character and potentially misdirect the police towards other suspects or motives. His efforts to cover his tracks extended to the home's security systems. Using Kristil's phone, he disabled their home security system at 8:15 a.m., just minutes after the estimated time of the attack. He then took blue masking tape from a kitchen drawer inside the house and used it to cover the family's doorbell camera, presumably to prevent it from recording his departure or any subsequent activity. Despite his attempts at concealment, some movements were captured. Surveillance footage from neighboring properties captured Daniel leaving the house at 8:24 a.m., approximately 30 minutes later than his usual departure time for work. Further adding to the suspicion, he turned off his car's dash camera around this time. He then stopped to buy a coffee on his way to his job in Glendale. According to the prosecution's timeline, shortly before 9 a.m., Daniel received messages on his own phone that he had pre-scheduled to be sent from Kristil's phone. This appears to have been an attempt to create a digital alibi, trying to make it appear as though Kristil was still alive and using her phone after he had left the house. However, digital forensic evidence would later become a critical piece of the prosecution's case, showing conclusively that Kristil's phone hadn't been used after 8:22 a.m., contradicting Daniel's fabricated timeline. Daniel arrived at his workplace just before 9:30 a.m. Hours passed without him contacting emergency services about his wife. It wasn't until around noon that he made several attempts to contact Kristil by calling and sending her a few text messages. When these went unanswered, according to his account, Daniel called the Broomfield police to request a welfare check on his wife, expressing concern because he couldn't reach her. Think about the chilling composure required to make that call, the calculated performance of a concerned husband, knowing full well the tragic scene that awaited law enforcement at his home. It's a level of deceit that is profoundly unsettling. An officer was promptly dispatched to the Krug home to perform the requested welfare check. Upon arrival, the officer made a grim discovery. Looking through a window, the officer could see Kristil on the floor of the garage. It was immediately apparent that something was terribly wrong. There were clear signs of head trauma and a visible stab wound. Emergency medical services were called, but it was too late. Kristil Krug was pronounced dead a short time later at 12:43 p.m. The subsequent autopsy would confirm the brutality of the attack, detailing at least 2 blunt force trauma wounds to the back of her head and the fatal stab wound to her chest. The investigation into Kristil's untimely death began immediately. Given Kristil's prior reports of being stalked, police initially focused their efforts on the ex-boyfriend she had mentioned. However, this line of inquiry quickly dissolved as investigators began to piece together the timeline and gather evidence. The Utah County Sheriff's Office was contacted and confirmed that the ex-boyfriend was indeed near his residence in Utah, over 8 hours away from Broomfield at the estimated time of Kristil's death. Furthermore, checks of travel records and flight manifests showed no indication that he had traveled to Colorado. He was definitively and unequivocally ruled out as a suspect in Kristil's murder or the preceding stalking. The investigators turned their attention to the digital trail left by the harassing messages Kristil had received. This is where the elaborate deception orchestrated by the real perpetrator began to unravel piece by chilling piece. They conducted digital forensics on the emails and texts. A crucial breakthrough came when they traced the IP address used to send some of the fake stalking emails. That IP address led directly back to a public Wi-Fi network utilized at Daniel Krug's workplace, a fact that was subsequently confirmed by his supervisor. This was a significant inconsistency in the narrative of a distant ex-boyfriend. Further digital evidence solidified the link to Daniel. Investigators found that burner phones used to send some of the harassing text messages had been purchased using a Visa gift card registered to Daniel Krug. Mobile phone data also showed that one of these burner phones was repeatedly located in the same general vicinity as Daniel's personal cell phone on multiple occasions, placing him geographically near the source of the harassing communications at various times. The security cameras Kristil had installed, specifically because of her fear stemming from the stalking, were found to have been suspiciously offline during the crucial time frame of the murder on December 14th. When questioned about this, Daniel Krug could not provide a plausible explanation for the cameras being off. Additionally, the fact that the doorbell camera had been manually covered with tape taken from inside the house further pointed away from an outside intruder and towards someone with access to the home. As the digital evidence mounted, painting an increasingly damning picture, a darker and more disturbing portrayal of Daniel Krug began to emerge. Investigators discovered unsettling Google searches made on Daniel's personal devices in the days leading up to Kristil's death, specifically on December 13th, the day before the murder. These searches were horrifyingly specific and relevant to the injuries Kristil sustained. Searches like, "When is a head injury a cause for concern? How hard would you have to hit someone in the head to make them unconscious? And how long can you be unconscious without brain damage?" These weren't the searches of a concerned husband. They appeared to be the research of someone planning a violent attack. Prosecutors argued compellingly during the trial that Daniel Krug's motive was deeply rooted in the failing state of his marriage to Kristil. Their relationship had deteriorated, and Kristil and Daniel were actively planning to divorce. Kristil's mother told police that her daughter's relationship with Daniel was not good, and that Kristil intended to seek full custody of their 3 children. Kristil's stepmother also mentioned marital problems and stated that Daniel was sometimes rough with the kids, and that Kristil planned to use a photo of injuries on one of the children's arms as evidence in the divorce proceedings to gain full custody. According to the prosecution's theory presented in court, Daniel Krug embarked on the twisted and elaborate puppet master scheme of impersonating a stalker in a desperate attempt to save his failing marriage. His plan was to terrify Kristil and then step in as her protector, uniting them as a couple against a common, fabricated enemy. However, this desperate plan backfired. As Kristil became more actively involved with the police and started to analyze the situation, she was, according to the prosecution, putting the pieces together. When Daniel realized she was growing suspicious and was determined to leave him and seek full custody, he saw his control slipping away entirely. Unable to accept this loss of control and unwilling to let her leave, prosecutors argued he decided to silence her permanently. The prosecution's closing argument powerfully conveyed this motive and the depth of his alleged malice, painting a stark picture. He didn't love her. He hated her. Think about what he did to her. The overwhelming weight of the digital and circumstantial evidence, combined with the clear motive presented by the prosecution, led to Daniel Krug's arrest on December 16, 2023. This was just 2 days after he had feigned concern and called in the welfare check that led to the discovery of Kristil's body. During his initial interview with police on the day Kristil was found, Daniel had denied killing his wife or having anything to do with her death, a denial that stood in stark contrast to the evidence police were rapidly accumulating. Daniel Krug was formally charged with several felonies: first-degree murder after deliberation, criminal impersonation, and 2 counts of stalking. His trial was a significant event, lasting for more than 2 weeks in April 2025 in Broomfield County District Court. The prosecution systematically presented their case, laying out the timeline of the elaborate stalking plot, the details of the brutal attack, Daniel's calculated attempts to cover up the crime, and the compelling digital evidence that directly linked him to both the harassment and the murder. The defense, led by Daniel Krug's attorneys, argued vigorously that there was an enormous disconnect between the physical evidence and the circumstantial picture the prosecution wants you to believe. Daniel Krug's defense attorney maintained his client's innocence throughout the trial, stating emphatically, "Mr. Krug did not kill his wife. He did not commit these crimes." They attempted to create doubt by pointing to the alleged lack of physical evidence directly linking Daniel to the killing, such as the absence of blood in his car or on his clothes, and highlighting that partial DNA from an unknown person was found on Kristil's neck. They also alleged that police work had been sloppy and potentially mishandled the investigation, suggesting that law enforcement had failed to adequately protect Kristil based on her initial reports and had potentially mishandled evidence at the crime scene, including, they claimed, not testing Kristil's phone for fingerprints despite the prosecution's assertion that Daniel sent texts from it after her death. Despite the defense's attempts to raise reasonable doubt, after a full day of deliberations, weighing the evidence and testimony presented, the jury delivered their verdict on Thursday, April 17, 2025. They found Daniel Krug guilty on all major charges: first-degree murder, stalking, emotional distress, threat, repeated communication, and criminal impersonation. As the guilty verdict was read aloud in the courtroom, an officer placed Daniel Krug in handcuffs. On the other side of the courtroom, Kristil's family, who had sat through the harrowing testimony, were present to witness the moment Daniel Krug was held accountable for his actions. On Friday, April 18, 2025, Daniel Krug was formally sentenced for the conviction of first-degree murder in the state of Colorado. The sentence is mandatory. Daniel Krug was sentenced to the statutorily required term of life in prison without the possibility of parole. He received an additional 9.5 years consecutive for the other convictions related to the stalking and criminal impersonation charges. Kristil Krug's life, so full of potential, accomplishment, and love, was tragically cut short by this senseless and horrific act of violence orchestrated and carried out by the person who had vowed to love and protect her. Her loved ones continue to mourn her loss and remember her for the incredible person she was. Her obituary described her as a remarkable soul who touched the lives of those around her. It highlighted her kindness, her generosity, her infectious laughter, her passion for the performing arts, and her exceptional intellect in the sciences. Above all, her 3 children were the absolute light of her life, and her dedication to them was paramount. She accomplished so much in her short life and had so much left to contribute before being so savagely removed, her obituary read, a poignant reminder of the future she was robbed of. The world will miss what she had yet to give us. The Kristil Krug case is a chilling and profoundly disturbing reminder of the potential for extreme manipulation, deception, and violence that can tragically occur within even seemingly normal and established relationships. It highlights the insidious nature of coercive control and the devastating, often fatal consequences when it escalates to its most extreme forms. Kristil, in the face of terrifying harassment, took rational and courageous steps to protect herself and her family. She documented the messages, she sought help from law enforcement, she installed security measures, and she prepared to defend herself physically. Yet, despite these efforts, the ultimate threat came from the person closest to her, the one she should have been safest with. It leaves us, as a community and as individuals, with profound and necessary questions. How can the signs of such elaborate deception and controlling behavior be better recognized, not just by victims, but by friends, family, and authorities? What more can be done within our systems to effectively protect individuals when they are most vulnerable, especially when the threat comes from within their own home and is disguised with such intricate lies? Kristil's story underscores the critical importance of listening to and believing victims of harassment and domestic abuse, and of understanding that the most dangerous situations can arise from unexpected sources. That concludes our look at the tragic case of Kristil Krug, a somber reminder of hidden dangers and the importance of recognizing abuse. If you or someone who needs help regarding domestic violence, please find resources linked in the description below. Thank you for watching this video on MURK Files. Like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories, and explore other videos on screen now. Stay curious, stay safe.